What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. We continue with our 2025 predictions for the upcoming 2025 college football season. Up next is the Pittsburgh Panthers. Pittsburgh coming off a pretty solid year last year, going 7-6 overall in 2024. And if you look actually back at Pittsburgh's season in 2024, this is a team that was in the top 25. They were also undefeated at 7-0, and then you go into the second half of the season, they lost their last 5 games of the season, so it was a good start to the season for Pittsburgh at 7-0. They were ranked in the top 25, and then they just fell apart at the end of the season, losing their last 5 games in the regular season, and then also if you count the bowl game, that makes 6 in a row. So yeah, great start to the year last year for Pittsburgh, and then a disappointing finish in 2024. My thoughts on this team for 2025. You know, you look at both sides of the football for Pittsburgh, we know they're going to be pretty solid on both sides of the football. You know, this is a very consistent program in the ACC. They have a potential chance to make a bowl game almost every year, except a couple of years ago where they had a disappointing season. But last year, you know, they definitely turned things around in 2024. Eli Holston is back at quarterback. We'll see if he can improve a little bit this year in 2025. Really, the only concern that I have for this team is probably the offensive line. They don't have a ton of depth there, but everywhere else looks pretty solid for them. Again, this is not a very talented team, but it's good enough to compete against like some of the top teams in the ACC and then also in the non-conference. So here's a look at the schedule for Pittsburgh as we go into the next graphic. I already got them beating Duquesne and Central Michigan. I meant to delete that graphic of, you know, last year's schedule, but they played Duquesne and Central Michigan to open things up on August 30th and September the 6th. That, of course, you know, I think Pittsburgh wins those 2 games pretty easily, and then they play on the road at West Virginia on September the 13th. Of course, they play West Virginia now almost every year since they brought the rivalry back in like 2021, I believe it was, or maybe 2022. And yeah, this has kind of been a close matchup here between these 2 teams in the last, like, you know, few years that these 2 teams brought the rivalry back. I think it's going to be another competitive game. It's obviously a revenge game for the Mountaineers. I mean, West Virginia, I don't think is going to be that great this year. They'll be solid. You know, they're just like Pittsburgh. They're a consistent program in the Big 12. They usually right there as a dark horse team, or even just a team that makes it to a bowl game every year. So yeah, I think this will be another competitive game. But I think the revenge factor for West Virginia will be there for them in this game. I think it's a low-scoring defensive game like it always is sometimes between these 2 teams. So I think West Virginia will get the win here, but I wouldn't be surprised if Pittsburgh did win this game. But I'm going to go with the Panthers, or actually the Mountaineers here to get the win. So I got Pittsburgh losing their first game of the year. That's going to put them at 2-1. And then they get their first bye week of the season before opening up ACC play against Louisville on September the 27th. I do like this spot for the bye week here for the Panthers. You know, you kind of get time to recover after that tough road game against West Virginia in the rivalry weekend. You can kind of regroup going into ACC play the rest of the way. But they also got one more non-conference game to play, which we'll get to here later on. Louisville's a team that added a bunch of additions in the portal, like they always do every year. They added Miller Moss at quarterback, and he's obviously a guy that I think is going to be pretty good for this Louisville team. Louisville is a team that, you know, has got to definitely get the passing game going. Defensively, they do got maybe some question marks there. But, you know, I already predicted Louisville to win this game. So, yeah, you can kind of go back to my Louisville video, and I did pick them to beat Pittsburgh here. But this is definitely one of those early kind of, you know, season test here for the Cardinals. Maybe they're a top 25 team right here, and then Pittsburgh definitely has a shot to pull off an upset. They did that a couple of years ago. If you go back to 2023, Pittsburgh gave Louisville a very embarrassing loss, and Pittsburgh ended up not being really good the rest of the way. So, yeah, Pittsburgh definitely has a shot here, but I think Louisville's definitely the better team here. I think they're definitely the more well-coached team. Jeff Brom is a coach that I do trust a lot more, and I also do trust Miller Moss at quarterback than Eli Holston. So I'm going to say that Louisville gets the win here, but I do expect a close game, and I do expect Pittsburgh to put up a fight in this one. And again, I wouldn't be surprised if the Panthers did win this game, but but I'm going to go with Louisville just because I think they're the more talented team and definitely the better roster, so that puts Pittsburgh now at 2-2. Then they play at home against Boston College on October the 4th. This is kind of, like a similar kind of game here between these two teams. I think both teams will want to run the football here. Boston College is a pretty similar team to Pittsburgh. They like to run the football, and they did that a lot last year. Boston College, I think, could be a solid team. They do definitely have some question marks, especially with the losses that they had on the offensive side of the football. But I expect a pretty competitive game here between these two teams. Again, Boston College is a team that definitely can pull off a win here, but I think Pittsburgh playing at home is pretty much the difference. I think this is a coin flip game, 50-50 type game, and so I think home field advantage might be the difference here. I'm going to say that the Panthers do get the win, and I think they get a much-needed win because after 2 losses in a row, they finally get a win, and I think they beat Pittsburgh here, or actually Boston College on October the 4th, so that's going to put the Panthers now at 3-2 on the season. Then they go back on the road to play Florida State on October the 11th. This is their first trip on the road in the ACC. Florida State is a team that's coming off a very disappointing year last year. And you look at these two teams, in the last couple years, they have been the most disappointing teams in the last couple years in the ACC. 2023, Pittsburgh was disappointing. Florida State was very good, and then last year, that obviously was different. Pittsburgh was solid, but Florida State ended up being terrible. So yeah, both of these teams are kind of trying to figure out who was better as that worst team in the last couple of years, but Florida State is playing at home in this one. I do expect the Seminoles to be a lot better this year. Not a whole lot better to be like a top contender in the ACC, and definitely not a top 25 team. But I think they definitely have the better roster here. So I'm going to say that the Seminoles do get the win here. Pretty close game, but I'm going to go with Florida State to get the win. So that drops Pittsburgh now to 3-3. Then they go on the road to play Syracuse on October the 18th. So back-to-back road games here with Florida State and Syracuse in the month of October. This is going to be a pretty tough game for Pittsburgh, in my opinion. Syracuse, I don't think is going to be all that great this year like they were from last year. I think it's going to be a step back here for the Orange. But you look at this matchup here. Pittsburgh, obviously, after playing a tough game on the road at Florida State last week, and some teams do trip up the next week playing another road game, and they could be a little bit beat up. Even though if it's a home game for them as well, they could be a little bit beat up, especially after playing that game. So I think that's going to probably happen in this one. I think Syracuse, again, not going to be a really good team this year, but I think Syracuse actually pulls off a little bit of a slight upset here because I feel like Pittsburgh is the better team, but I'm going to say that Syracuse actually gets the win. Again, I think Pittsburgh, they come in a little bit beat up. They don't really, come in focused in this one. They probably, overlook Syracuse thinking they're going to beat them easily, but I don't think so. I think Pittsburgh actually loses this game. So that's back-to-back losses on the road for Pittsburgh. That's going to put them at 3-4. And then after that, it's a home game against NC State on October the 25th. Pretty even matchup here, in my opinion. These two rosters have like both solid, players, and they also added the same additions in the transfer portal on both sides of the football as well. I think this is a pretty even matchup, just like the Boston College game, and then also just like the West Virginia game. I think home field advantage really is the difference in this one, so I think Pittsburgh gets a much-needed bounce-back win after 2 losses in a row, kind of like the same story with, those games in the month of September against West Virginia and Louisville, and then they get a bounce-back win against Boston College, but this time it will be against NC State, so I think in a pretty close game, I'm going to go with Pittsburgh to get the win over NC State here on October 25th. That's going to put Pittsburgh back at 500 on the season at 4-4, and then after that, they play on the road at Stanford on November 1st. So obviously Pittsburgh has to travel out west here. Stanford, though, you look at this team, there's nothing really to like about Stanford. Coming up for 2025, new coaching staff, and obviously a new era for Stanford. There's just not a lot to like about this roster either. So yeah, I think Stanford is not going to be a good team this year, and I think they're going to probably be the worst team in the ACC, and they also could in fact be the worst Power 4 team in the country. But I think Pittsburgh, maybe they start off slow just because it's out west and everything, but Pittsburgh definitely should be able to take care of business at the end of the day. So I got the Panthers winning this one, so that's going to put them at 5-4, and then they actually get a bye week right after playing Stanford, which I think is really a good spot for a bye week because you got a big game against Notre Dame coming up on November the 15th against the Fighting Irish at home on November 15th. So yeah, Notre Dame is a big game here for Pittsburgh. Obviously, you get the bye week before playing this game after traveling out west, 2 weeks ago. That does give you time to prepare, especially after playing, out west and everything, and then also coming in to play a physical Notre Dame team. But you just look at this Notre Dame team. There's talent everywhere on both sides of the football, especially with running the football and then also defensively. I don't think the passing game is going to be pretty explosive for Notre Dame. They're going to want to run the football here, and that's going to be the same thing here for Pittsburgh, but I don't think Pittsburgh has what it takes to pull off an upset here. Notre Dame is just way ahead of Pittsburgh right now, and I know Pitt can definitely compete against some of the top teams in the ACC and then also some top teams in the country, but I don't think it's going to be enough. I think they probably keep it close maybe for a while, but then Notre Dame probably pulls away. It could be by the second quarter or even the second half. Maybe it's a close game in the first half, but Notre Dame is the better team, so I'm going to say that the Fighting Irish get the win. So yeah, no upset there for Pittsburgh. That's going to drop them back to 500 at 5-5, and then they play at Georgia Tech on November 22nd. Georgia Tech, I think, is going to be a pretty good team this year. They have a lot coming back on both sides of the football. They also got Haynes King back at quarterback. And obviously Pittsburgh is going to come in a lot beat up here in this game. And, obviously Notre Dame is a physical team. So, yeah, Pittsburgh will definitely be a lot more beat up compared to, probably the Syracuse and Florida State back-to-back road game trip. They will definitely be a lot more beat up in this one than probably those two games. Yeah, Georgia Tech is a team that I think is going to want to run the football as well. Haynes King can run the football as a quarterback, and he's a guy that I do trust a lot more than Eli, Holston at quarterback for Pittsburgh. Yeah, Haynes King just has a lot more experience at the quarterback position, and that's what I think is going to come down to is which quarterback do you trust the more? And I'm going to say that, it's going to be Haynes King. So I got Georgia Tech getting the win here. So that's going to drop Pittsburgh down to 5-6, and they have to win this game next to play in a bowl game. They play Miami to close out the year on November 29th. I did pick the Hurricanes already to win this game, but I do expect a close one here for Pittsburgh. They definitely have a big shot here to pull off a big upset, in order to make it to a bowl game still. And it also could be a game where Miami definitely has a playoff spot on the line, just like how it was last year when they lost to Syracuse. Pittsburgh could definitely end Miami's playoff hopes again in 2025 this time, but I don't think it will be enough. Miami, I think, is the more talented team, and Carson Beck is a quarterback that I do trust a lot more than Eli Holston. So I'm going to say that Pittsburgh loses a close game, though. So I'm going to go with Miami to get the win here. So I got Pitt closing out the year with 3 losses in a row, and I got this team finishing 5-7 in 2025. I know that Pittsburgh can definitely do a lot better than that. This team can definitely at least go 6-6 or even 7-5. I think 7-5, 6-6, and 5-7 are your most likely records here for the Panthers. Again, this is a team that definitely should be like a bowl eligible team in 2025, but a pretty tough schedule. I can definitely see them beating Louisville. That's probably going to be the biggest win if they were able to do that. They could probably win that game, and that might be the biggest win on their schedule. Or they can probably beat Miami. Whichever the one of the two they win, I think they make it to a bowl game at 6-6. But I got this team coming up just short because of how tough the schedule is, and I got this team finishing 5-7 for that reason. So that's my prediction for Pittsburgh for 2025. Do you guys agree or disagree with this prediction? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and give me your prediction for this team as well. Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.